I have a dream. And what my dream is that Israel can, should, and will become an important source of innovative solutions to challenges of the developing world in fields which we're really good in already, like agriculture and health and education and ICT, Internet Information and Communications Technology, that one day Israelis are not going to just be known as people who live in the startup nation, but will be people who will be known as people who live in the development startup nation that has brought all sorts of innovations to the world that have changed the way that people live. So I was asked to talk a little bit about how it is that I got to the dream, which I think is a little bit less interesting. So you get 2 minutes on that. And then the rest of the 10 minutes, I'm going to talk not about myself, but about Israel and why this is not just my dream, but should be Israel's dream. So as you might be able to tell from the accent, I was not born in Israel. I was born in Canada. And when I was a little girl, many of you may remember Live Aid. Right, there was this huge international concert in order to raise money for famine relief in Ethiopia. And I was a little girl and I watched it and I was just totally enamored by this concept that there were people in the world who didn't have the most basic things, didn't have food and didn't have clean water and didn't have schooling. And maybe I could work in that field and I could make a difference for people. So I ran home and I was very excited about this idea that I was going to save the world. And then my grandparents, I went to my grandparents and I said, I know what I want to do when I grow up. And my grandparents said to me, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to Africa and I want to save starving people. And my grandparents said, but you're Jewish. And if you're going to save anyone, you should save Israel. And you have to go to Israel and make aliyah. And there's plenty of poor people in Israel, so why didn't you help the poor people in Israel? So I was always a good girl. And so when I finally hit the age of 18, because my grandparents told me not to go to Africa, that I ought to be going to Israel, I went to Israel. And I joined the army, and then after I joined the army, I joined the Foreign Service. But deep in my heart of hearts, I always wanted to work with people in developing countries and to help solve the most urgent, pressing, and desperate problems of our time. So I come into the Foreign Service, and the first thing that happens is I go through the training course, and I was a single woman. And in the Foreign Ministry, they had a policy, single women don't go to dangerous places. So they wanted to send me to Prague, and I said, no, I want to go to the Congo. And they said, no, but you can't go to the Congo. You're a single woman. I was like, yeah, I know. And they said, but there's no Jews in the Congo. How are you going to find someone to marry you? They did say that is done. Actually, finally the deal that we struck was that I had to speak to the rabbi in the community, and if the rabbi said that it was all right that I go, then I could go. And so I did, and then I was in the Congo for a number of years, and then I came back and they offered me a job on the Washington desk working with the administration of Washington, and I said, but I don't want to go to the Washington desk, I want to work in international development, and so I worked in Mashav, which many of you may know is Israel's development cooperation branch, and I was doing cooperation with Arab countries. But the issue is this: is that Israel has a very, very small aid budget, and there's not all that much we can do. I mean, Mashav does a great job, but it's in a very small amount. Israel gives less money to international aid than any other country in the OECD as a percentage of our gross national income. So we barely give any money. So that wasn't the answer. So I went to the World Bank, and in the time that I wasn't here, two things happened which have entirely changed the potential for Israel making an impact on the world. The first thing is as follows. If I had told you 20 years ago what Africa needs more than anything in order to solve all of its problems is technology, you would have laughed at me. You would have said, what do you mean technology? They don't have electricity. Now, two really important things have changed since then. First of all, cell phones. You may or may not know this, but there are almost 1 billion cell phones now in Africa. Africa is a bigger growing market now for cell phones than the United States is. And everywhere you go to the poorest villages, you go to villages which are not connected to electricity grids, there are cell phones. And cell phones have totally transformed people's lives. So you have cell phones now to do banking where people didn't have access to banks before. People can pay for things with their cell phones. You have this great app called iCow. So if you have a cow and you need to know how to take care of your cow, then iCow will send you little messages telling you what you should be doing with your cow on that particular day. You can sort of text things and say, look, my cow looks a little sick today, what should I do with my cow? And then iCow will answer you what you should do with your cow. There's point of care diagnostics where they're now developing ways to diagnose malaria through a cell phone. And it's amazing because the weirdest thing happens in Africa. You go to villages in Africa and you will not find a doctor anywhere near there within like 1,000-mile radius. You will not find a lab where they can do blood tests, but you will always find a pharmacy. You'll go into the middle of nowhere and you'll be able to get drugs. So the idea of having point-of-care diagnostics means that all of a sudden people who had no idea what they had, they can find out they have malaria, they can find out they have tuberculosis, and they can get treated for it. So all of a sudden technologies are changing the world, and partly they're being able to do this because now we also have off-grid solar technologies and off-grid water technologies. And you don't need to put down these huge networks throughout the entire country in order to bring water to people. Still, something like a quarter to a third of the world doesn't have electricity today, and they don't have water in that they're not connected to a grid. And through 60 years of trying to connect people to a grid, we haven't connected a third of the world. But in the same way that cell phones means that most people today have access to communications, off-grid water and energy means that one day everyone's going to have access to electricity and water without being connected to any kind of cable anywhere. So that's the first big thing that's happened. The second big thing that happened is probably a lot of you remember around the year 2000, 1999, there were these huge demonstrations against the World Bank and the IMF and against globalization, and hundreds of thousands of people came out to say it's really terrible that all of these international organizations are trying to bring in large multinational corporations to developing countries to exploit developing countries. So what has happened since then is that all of a sudden people realized that in order for developing countries to develop, we need the help of the private sector. Because many, many, many more times money come in from the private sector to developing countries than from aid. So there's maybe 10 times as much private sector investment in Africa than there is aid. And so all of a sudden companies are no longer the bad guys, they're the good guys. And when it comes to technology, that's really important because, for example, internet was started in arguably in the ministry, as a project of the Ministry of Defense in the US. If internet had stayed in the Ministry of Defense in the US, none of us would own computers. Because you need the drive, you need the innovation, you need the ability to take risks that the private sector has in order to bring out the best ideas. So without the private sector, there is no way we're going to bring about those innovations that are going to change the lives of people in things like food security and health and education and so on and so forth. And so here we are in Israel, the startup nation, with this enormous capacity to look at problems and look at the fact that we have so few resources to deal with those problems and find all of these really creative ways of solving them anyways. And we're good exactly in the things that people in developing countries need. We're good in agriculture, we're good in water, we're good in renewable energy, or we're getting better in renewable energy at least. We're good in educational technologies so that if people don't have their good universities where they are, they can now go to the University of the People, which was started by an Israeli, and learn online. And we have the capacity to use that. And not to use that because we have a huge aid budget, but to use that because we have entrepreneurs who care about the world and who can tap into private sector mechanisms in order to get financing and to find business models that will enable them to actually profit from helping people in the world. And that's what our work is in Tel Aviv University, is that we work very closely with the government to develop support programs like for entrepreneurs that are interested in innovation for development. Like we now have been working with the chief scientist to have all sorts of different funds set up for people who want to innovate for developing countries. We do lots of lectures and meetup groups for the private sector to build their capacity to innovate for developing countries and to find ways that they can do so profitably. We work with civil society in order to build up interest in Israel and awareness to the fact that Israel has this amazing potential to transform the world if we only apply ourselves. And little by little, we're changing things. And so, for example, we have a group called Israel Dev. You can all Google it online. It's israeldev.org. And what we do there is we bring together Israelis from every walk of life, from every segment of business activity, who care and who want to figure out how they can use their talents in order to solve problems of developing countries and in order to market technologies which change people's lives. And we connect them together and we support them and we help them.